welcome everyone to the September forum, but it's in October. We had to postpone last week, and I'll share with you why. Because last week we had a fun time at a class over in Tennessee. So this is at the Oak Ridge Enhanced Technology and Training Center, beautiful building. And this group, again, from all over, including the Navy. We had a senior chief from the Navy on top of a number of other sites as usual. And that was a lot of fun. So I was there last week. We had to move it to this week. So without further ado, and welcome those that are joining us now. I wanted to share with you a few of the updates, really quick updates, and you just heard a big one there, the recent class. Actually, it was the last 4-day class we have for the year, and the October cohort that started today is actually the last cohort for the year as well. Then there's this window between November and January where I take the time to shoot new videos, update the courses. I'm creating new courses, small courses actually, and AI really helps speed up that process as well. So I'm looking forward to having a number of new offerings next year. We'll go to the next gen BlueDragon, which now includes how to use AI for data analysis. Maybe give you some stronger lessons on that. But February we kick off again. Months 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, we'll have the online cohorts, and we do not have a schedule yet for the live 4-day workshops. I actually have to secure some venues, and there's some good things out there in New Mexico for the folks out west, of course, at Oak Ridge for the folks in the east. And if Livermore wants me to come out, I'll come back out to California. All right, Brad. Okay. The very interesting thing that we're working on now, happy to share with you, we are in the middle of phase 1 of an assessment at the Darlington nuclear plant in Ontario. Darlington has 4 reactors. Their sister plant, Pickering, has 6. So it's quite a large nuclear utility in Canada. And they wanted us to look at a very big 1.0 AFI, which had to do with leadership, teamwork, the effectiveness of leadership, and supervisors and training and all that. So it's a pretty big area, and they thought they'd bring us in from the outside to take a look at this. So I will be in Canada all next week doing phase 2 in person, just like I finished doing the Ohio, the Perry plant in Ohio, which was a huge assessment. That one was almost a 5-week assessment of the entire site performance. So we're having fun doing these large-scale commercial nuclear assessments using BlueDragon. They're finding it very useful, very comprehensive. We don't miss anything. We take a really hard look all across the board, and they love the way we attack a problem. So commercial nuclear is starting to catch on that we've got something better than they're used to. We also have a potential BlueDragon contract coming up at PSC&G, which is Salem and Hope Creek in the area of equipment reliability. We'll see if that pans out this year or next year. We're not sure. But that is being discussed as we speak. Okay. Aside from that, that's all of the quick updates we have. We're winding down here at the end of the year. It's been a rough year, I tell you, because a lot of the sites that depend on government contracts have, of course, suffered from all of the policy changes in the beginning of the year in January. And so a lot of training dollars were kind of frozen. So we didn't have a lot of students from the Department of Energy sites as we normally do. So that was a little rough. Maybe now with the government shutdown that started today, there'll also be some repercussions there, but we actually don't expect any more students for the rest of the year. We already have folks that have already paid for and are fully immersed right now in our BD2 course, the final October cohort. All right, so now, are there any burning questions before I go into today's refresher training? And that is going to be factors driving human and organizational performance in the context of BlueDragon. Particularly fun topic. So This is a special topic for me, and I've really latched onto this way back from when I was in commercial nuclear in the 80s with the Institute of Nuclear Power Operation, and all the emphasis on human performance and human performance evaluation from INPO, all stemming out of the 3 Mile Island meltdown that happened in 1979. So I'm going to dive into some of the deeper references that are built into BlueDragon you just never get to see. So I thought I'd open the door and let you peek inside some of the inner workings of the BlueDragon framework. Um, but before I start, does anyone have any questions out there that they want to throw out? Okay, feel free, throw it into the chat or speak up. I want to keep this informal. I'm just happy you're all here. You're all in the business of learning and improving. And I think, as you've seen, learning how to do critical thinking, complex problem solving, especially in human and organizational type problems, is a big addition to your repertoire, huge skill, resume builder, and it'll last you for your entire career. So, without further ado, why don't we dive into this topic on the factors driving human and organizational performance from the perspective of some of the science behind how we structured BlueDragon. So I think it'd be nice to show you all that. Okay, and let me do a little bit of muting here. A couple of folks. Dave Giblin, good to see you. It's been a while. Glad you're here. Okay, if I haven't muted you, please mute your microphones unless you'd like to ask a question or something. All right, so let's start with this. Human performance, excellent human performance and organizational performance is driven by some key factors, and these are pretty obvious, right? How humans behave within the system, and human behaviors are driven by our value system and what we believe to be true, right? And that output results in human behavior, but it could also be influenced by a lot of external pressures. So we remember that from the class. Lots of things can affect human behaviors at the individual level. Now, we have to have strong defenses in place to accommodate the infinite variability in human behavior and to make sure things work right. So we know all about work controls, industrial safety requirements, and the such to make sure we can work safely at our sites. Okay, so what this really means is that we have to empower people with the right skills and the mindsets, right? And we have to have multiple layers of defense and depth, forming our organizational defenses. And that is at the heart of how BlueDragon is set up. So why don't we get into a little bit deeper, talk about the two parts, human behaviors and organizational defenses. And in terms of human behaviors, this is pretty simple to understand. We need to train the folks. We need to hire folks that are skilled in the particular areas. We need to have a positive safety culture. And there are surveys that help us pulse safety culture, but culture is a very tricky thing. I teach that in class. It's a minefield. To tell an organization that they have a bad culture of some sort, those are fighting words. So it has to be self-identified for the organization to buy into this and want to actually get after the deep-seated cultural issues. But it's very hard to get there with a normal analysis, whether a condition report or some other investigation, some other assessment or self-assessment. It's very difficult. It takes a lot of evidence for management to pull the trigger and saying we have a poor culture of one sort or another. And that requires strong leadership, leadership that models desired behaviors, right? That walks the talk, that has the ability to influence what we believe to be true and to influence our own value system. So if we have that, then we are going to be able to change the behaviors of the entire organization with a strong leadership team. And sometimes it's not for lack of strong leaders, it's because they're overwhelmed by all kinds of things that are going around them. And And this is where the structure, right, the infrastructure and the programs, processes, and procedures and how well they describe what needs to be done, right? Well-designed tasks is what that refers to. And of course, equipment reliability is huge. Equipment reliability is a key aspect because if, as we have seen in a lot of places, including commercial nuclear power, if the equipment is giving you troubles and you're not maintaining the equipment properly, guess what? You're going to be in a firefighting mode, chasing down all kinds of issues and trying to keep up with corrective maintenance. And hopefully, you don't allow your preventive maintenance to go into right second level of postponement, which is a bad place to be. Okay, and last but not least, we have this whole thing about learning from our mistakes. So we have to be able to learn from our mistakes. That requires documenting information, deviations, non-conformances, non-compliance, and having a good way to investigate them. Causal analysis, root cause analysis for the more significant ones. And that is a serious challenge. Everywhere we look, that is very weak. The worst part about this, if you haven't found this document, the NEI 2610 2016, the year 2016-10, there's this document that NEI put out trying to help the nuclear utilities to be more efficient with their corrective action programs. And what they ended up saying is, don't do root cause analysis. I'm not kidding. Just do some more trending, and trending analysis everywhere I've looked is very weak. So, oh boy, so are we really a learning organization? Are we in continuous improvement? That's tough. I don't see that as being a strength in too many places. We do check the box, right? If you have a QA program, you're going to check the box for criteria 16 corrective action programs. But how effective is it in preventing recurrence? All right, let's move on to organizational defenses. And here's a good list, right? We talked about we have to work to an effective set of programs, policies, procedures, etc. We also have physical barriers, physical defenses, as well as cyber controls to keep us safe, keep us from getting attacked by the North Koreans, the Chinese, the Russians, who are trying to hack into our systems and get into our top secret information. So we don't want to do that. We have lots of engineer controls, and where engineering controls matter a lot for those of us growing up in commercial nuclear is in terms of the nuclear reactor safety, right? We have a lot of engineered safety features to keep us from melting down a reactor, for example, automatic scramps, right? We have training programs to make sure the organization has the right skill set. We anticipate problems. We're going to have problems, emergencies, events. So we have to have good emergency response plans. And we like to have independent oversight to monitor from an arm's length what's going on, so they can tell us that our babies are ugly when we need to be told as a leadership team. All right, so that's a large set of defenses that we put in place from the organizational standpoint. So that's the backdrop, right? Human behavior, organizational defenses is going to determine how well an organization, a station, a site performs overall. So now I want to bring in a few of the most critical books, references, scientific research, whatever I've come across in my 40 years that I thought would add and enhance to our ability to solve complex human and organizational problems. And keep this in mind. Humans are the infinite variable. I keep saying that, right? And what we're looking for in these issues, situations, problems, deviations, nonconformances are the deeper seated latent and organizational weaknesses and even cultural weaknesses that are affecting the station's performance. And that includes how the humans are behaving and performing and the weaknesses in the organizational defenses that are allowing bad things to happen, right? Okay, so let's start off with something that if Susan Blackburn was here, she would be head over heels. She was actually in my course last week in Tennessee, and Susan Blackburn is the manager for HOP at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. And she taught a 15-minute segment on HOP during my BlueDragon course. But let's talk about some of the principles here that are hugely important, right? And this is going all the way back to 3 Mile Island. The Institute of Nuclear Power Operations first broached these principles in the early 80s. This is how far back this goes. So now they've retreaded it as HOP. Great. It's teaching the exact same things that we were learning in commercial nuclear power a very long time ago. But let's talk about these. Human errors are normal. What does that mean? That even skilled, conscientious workers are going to make mistakes. It's an inherent human trait, right? So we should anticipate errors rather than punish people for being human. And I say that a million times in class. We need the personnel who were involved in these issues or incidents or big mistakes. We need them to help solve the problem. So why would I disincentivize them by punishing them, or worse, firing them so their knowledge base is no longer available to me? That's crazy, right? So we're not trying to eliminate all human error. That's impossible. Go back to square one. Humans are the infinite variable. Okay. Go to number two. Blaming the human fixes nothing, right? It's counterproductive. And to expand on what I just said, we cannot be focusing on who's at fault. If that's our approach, guess what? People crawl under a rock and you don't get anywhere. You don't really solve the problem. So focus on what's wrong with the system. So I'm not going into systems theory today, but certainly understanding a system is hugely important to solving a problem, and humans are key and integral to that system. So let's go to the next one. The environment in which humans work in drives human behavior, right? The context in which the work is being done will drive human behavior. So let me expand on that, right? They usually respond to the conditions, the working conditions, and the leadership and the culture that has been established there, right? So behavior is affected by, again, value systems and belief systems. And if there's external work pressures or other issues with the equipment or bad procedures, if the working conditions are not optimal, right? Even well-intentioned individuals are going to make poor decisions and they're going to make mistakes. So what do? We look at the situation, we look at the environment. And how do we do that? We do error likely situation surveys. And those are crucial. So we have the one that we put out, the BlueDragon Error Likely Situation Survey, which again comes from INPO. But there's hundreds of others that you can pull off the shelf. And I give out at least 4 more in class, one from Harvard, one from OSHA, one from Nuclear Safety Culture from INPO. So there's all kinds of great stuff to see what the culture is like and the working environment for the individuals. Okay, now let's talk about leader response. How management and leadership react to errors really sets the tone for safety culture, right? I'll tell you what the worst one is. Take a guess which organization that I have worked with intimately has the worst possible leader response to errors, mistakes, usually a punitive response, right? Which is going to drive problems underground. So that's the worst thing that happens. But let me give it to you this way. The military. The military is the single worst offender of this because what they try to do in every case is to find a belly button to blame. Let's assign blame to someone in the organization. Let's declassify them, disqualify them, and then we go into the blame, shame, and retrain game. And so that is their go-to. They do not know how to investigate problems. The military has a really hard time doing causal analysis. And their instructions for mishap investigations are terrible, terribly antiquated. They don't even have instructions to capture organizational breakdowns, right? Cultural climate issues. So the military is really not good at that. Anyway, that's an aside, but in my travels, I haven't seen anything worse than the joint force and how they attack mistakes and human errors. And of course, it's all about learning from these mistakes, from these failures. That takes people collaborating with us, right? The humans have to collaborate with us. Every failure and near miss carries some lessons to be learned. And more than that, we can identify the gaps in performance and the weaknesses in our defenses. So why don't we go about learning from these failures, identifying the gaps, and identifying the weaknesses in our defenses, and strengthening that, right? The other thing we don't want to do is treat every incident as an isolated event. And now we get to talk about my second favorite saying, the event whack-a-mole theorem, right? Solving one event at a time is insanity. That's what I teach in class. That's what I firmly believe. If we can go deep past the single event root causes, we're going to find deep-seated latent organizational weaknesses that are affecting not only this event, but many, many others, and will prevent many others into the future. So not treating each failure individually is where there's a return on investment in the time that you're taking to do these investigations. All right, HOP, big one. Okay, now to another actually very popular, and I believe most of you have heard of the Swiss cheese model by James Reason, developed a long time ago. And actually, it was very formative for me. It was very instructional for me, right? And we learned that each slice of cheese, of course, Swiss cheese, so it has holes in it, right, is a defensive layer. And so what James Reason was trying to tell us is that there is a combination of failures across multiple layers of our defenses that align in such a way, in addition to the variable human behavior, so that we bypass all the defenses, so that the human behavior bypasses all the defenses, and we light the powder keg and we blow up. If you know that drawing where you see a lightning bolt go through all the defenses, the Swiss cheese, and there's a powder keg at the other side, right? So that's what he was trying to show us visually, and it was a very attractive visual display, and it made a lot of sense, right? And so what he's saying is that we have physical barriers, defenses, we have administrative defenses, right? Our own human actions is a defense, and we have the organization itself, programs, processes, procedures, and culture is a defense, right? And then he talks about latent organizational, programmatic, and cultural weaknesses, and he called them organizational pathogens. I like that term, right? So latent conditions, pathogens, they're not really going to cause an accident by themselves, but they will weaken our defenses. So a lot of individual latent organizational and programmatic weaknesses are there, but in the right combination, including the right or wrong human behavior, then you're going to end up with an event. Our job is to uncover as many of those latent organizational and programmatic weaknesses, those pathogens, and just like you would destroy a virus, we need to kill those latent weaknesses so that we don't have any more issues going forward, right? For me, this Swiss model, the Swiss cheese model, a long time ago was like a guiding paradigm. So our own integrated analysis explicitly looks at all the defenses that applied to that system when we start looking into the system, right? The system's inventory. So now we're calling out all of the defenses that should have made this work go safely and properly, but it didn't, but they didn't, right? It wasn't a single defense. You see that by now in our models. That's James Reason. Very good. All right, one of the crowd favorites. All right, here's another crowd favorite. Normal accident theory. Charles Perrault. This has also been around for a while. And this, if we embrace these principles that I'm bringing up and that I studied a long time ago, you're going to be way ahead of the game in terms of understanding why it is so important to solve problems a certain way, right? From a systems theory perspective, understanding that the humans are infinite variables, completely fallible, and that accidents are normal. That's his main theory. Accidents are inevitable, right? When you have a complex system, and most of us work in complex systems, right? Multiple failures are going to occur. in unexpected ways, in spite of our best defenses. That is just the way it is, right? And the other thing is, so you have a lot of little issues, but if you're not uncovering the deeper seated issues, eventually you will have catastrophic events, right? So that's something to keep in the back of your mind. So now let's go to the next one. Multiple and unexpected failures are built into complex, tightly coupled systems. What does that mean? Well, we have a nuclear power plant. How difficult is it to operate a nuclear power plant or a nuclear weapons manufacturing facility that a lot of you work at, or a jet fighter, right? There's a lot of components. Think about the numbers of components and systems and high hazards, right? And fluids and everything involved to make this work. There's so many components and interdependencies that it is impossible to foresee every interaction between those components. So the system is going to perform a certain way, the product of the interactions of the elements within the system, right? And even though every one of those may have a low failure rate, the sheer numbers of interactions between all the components in the system are going to eventually result in unexpected failures. That's just the way of the world. Accidents are normal. Expect accidents. They are inevitable. And you cannot simply design a system that is perfectly 100% capable of preventing accidents. It's not going to happen, right? So you can't contain accidents completely. So we should try to prevent accidents, but there is no such thing as zero risk through simply design, right? In big complex operations. And then you add to that that human errors are going to happen. Marry that with James Reason and HOP, and we start to sink in that human errors, they're nothing but symptoms. Very, very superficial for us, the starting point of trying to understand what happened. So we're not going to focus on the human and the human mistakes. They are symptoms, not causes, right? So unfortunately, you go look at airline mishaps, military mishaps, and what are the words you hear the most when you see it on the news? Operator error. When I see the words operator error flash across the screen or being discussed in one of these events, I cringe, right? Operator error. Oh boy, that is so easy to point the finger at an operator and move on, right? Disqualify, or worse, if an airplane crashes or a ship collides with another ship, operator error, get rid of those people, and now we can pretend that we solved the problem, and we really didn't. So the number of recurring mishaps in the Navy is actually going up, and it's cost us taxpayers a lot of dollars, and it's cost us a lot of lives as well. So I was recently doing research in that area, and I've published some blogs about that. Okay, the last bullet: organizational and management factors. And let me get out of the way. Our main failures, our main causes of failures in complex systems. So, who creates the work environment, right? So, what Perot highlights for us is that decisions that management makes may put pressure on the humans, like production pressure. Um, we might have created some latent conditions for disaster. For example, we chose one design over another. So big picture management decisions can actually lead to major accidents. Okay, I'll give you a great example. I went to work at a facility where we're taking depleted uranium, converting it to uranium oxide powder. The byproduct is hydrofluoric acid. We just collected in big vats. And when I saw that room, the room was huge. There were probably 500 bolted flange connections in all the piping, and every one of those bolted flange connections could leak HF acid, and a thimbleful can kill you. I saw a sprinkler system of HF acid in all of those bolted flange connections, and when I asked about the design, they said, well, we wanted thermal sleeved flange connections, but the government denied us that design, saying that it was too expensive. So if anything ever happens at these sites, you get the government to blame for passing up on the safer design. creating a huge error likely situation. Okay. Charles Perrault. Moving on to the next one. Um, and it's actually the last one I want to present today. And I have many more. I just don't have the time to present so much material. HRO. This is one of my favorites. Wyke and Sutcliffe, great book. I really would hope you go buy that book. High Reliability Organization Principles is something near and dear because they actually studied nuclear power plants and jets landing on aircraft carriers, right? So there were a lot of really interesting things that they studied. And they come up with these 5 principles that are very powerful. You have to understand these principles really well. Number 1, preoccupation with failure. High reliability organizations, right, are always alert to the possibility of an error or a failure. So nuclear power plants, we're always on high alert. Aircraft carriers, so many things can go wrong in an aircraft carrier, right? So even near misses and anomalies are treated as indications of potential systemic failure, systemic problems, right? And we never become complacent. So if you grew up in commercial nuclear like I did, you're much more preoccupied with failure and knowing that there's a great possibility for error and that we look for the symptoms and try to get after the deep-seated issues before those same deep-seated issues result in a catastrophic failure, not just a minor event. Okay. All right. The next one, we do not, this is something I find all over the place. In fact, I've heard it recently, right? People have this need to simplify or interpret issues in a certain way to reduce the severity or the significance or the perceived consequences. And I'll give you the best example that I see everywhere. Look at your corrective action programs, all of you. Look at your site's corrective action programs. Look at when you're required to do a root cause. And what you'll find in the CAP or the CR, the condition reporting instructions and procedures and guidelines, is that they will do everything to lower the classification of the issue or the event instead of raising it to a deep investigation so that you can actually prevent recurrence. So organizations have been downgrading, downclassifying their issues forever, for decades, in order to prevent doing the hard work that it takes to actually solve the problems, right? Problems are complex. They require a rigorous investigation, or else you're not going to prevent recurrence. So, got to resist the temptation to oversimplify what's going on. Okay, let me get myself out of the picture here. What else do we have? We have an acute awareness of the front line, meaning situational awareness, right? So here's the thing. We got to stay connected to the actual work conditions and maintain communications across all levels, right? Everyone has to keep the finger on the pulse of what's going on at the sites. That's all of us. And how do we do that? Well, we could have management walkthroughs. We can have real-time metrics, whether in a control room or some other visible location that actually needs real-time information. Or like the Toyota production system, my favorite example, we can actually have the low-level employees speak up when something is off, or actually stop work or pause work when something is off, right? So we look at strong operational awareness as an organizational defense, right? We call out situational awareness as a defense. One of the things in the IMPO, error likely prevention tools and techniques as well. Okay, next, we train and equip people to be problem solvers. Wow, that's where we come in. And we prepare to contain the problem. There you go. Extent of initial conditions is containment. We teach that. And bounce back from errors. So if you can efficiently and effectively solve a deep-seated problem from a consequential event, you're going to turn into a very resilient organization. To me, bouncing back from errors means resilience. And so this is a commitment to resilience. Because despite our best efforts, things are going to happen. Bad things are going to happen. So we prepare to contain and bounce back from whatever is going on. And we have to train and equip our people to be problem solvers, when these unexpected situations come up, right? So in training, we'll drill for emergencies. We'll cross-train staff. For example, everyone in my organization at a nuclear plant back in the day, not only were we QA auditors and inspectors and QC inspectors and all that, but we all had a part in the emergency response organization. So we all played a different role at different times when things went south, right? So we cross-train so we can come to and defend the plant against some serious threats, some serious issues. And then last but not least, deference to expertise. What does that mean? And in the military, again, this is something that works against us. Just because you have 4 stripes doesn't mean that you are the best person, the all-knowing, and so on. Of course, I take an exception to senior chiefs. Senior chiefs do know everything, and master chiefs in the Navy. That was my experience. But decision making and charting the path forward in terms of a crisis or some kind of a novel situation, we need to defer with the people with the most knowledge, not necessarily the highest rank or seniority, right? So during emergencies, guess what we need to do? We need to flatten the hierarchy and allow the experts on the issue to lead the charge. And guess what that means in terms of BlueDragon? When it comes down to experts in investigating issues, guess who the experts on the site are in terms of leading an investigation into a serious problem? It isn't the department head or the director or folks that have 40 years experience. It's you, the BlueDragon trained personnel who are the experts in solving a problem. I often give the example of the Challenger and the Columbia incidents. Particularly, I talk about the Rogers Commission after the Challenger incident and how they brought everybody to the party, all kinds of graybeards, PhDs, astronauts, very esteemed personnel. And yes, with their knowledge base, they did a lot of good. They did forget to bring a root cause subject matter expert to the party, one at our level. And it's almost like going to trial without a trial attorney. Why would you ever go to trial without an attorney? Well, they went to find out what's wrong with these deep-seated organizational problems like the Challenger and the Columbia without an expert in that particular field. They were experts in many other fields, very respected experts, but it takes slightly different skills, as you were seeing now. If you're in this room right now with me, it's because you've learned all about the BlueDragon process and the skills that it takes to solve problems. So deference to experience, that is something where you, whatever level you are at your organization, back at your national laboratories, you can be looked up to as someone that's going to lead them through an arduous, rigorous process that is going to actually solve problems, save lives, and save lots of time and resources spent in rework. Okay, guess what? That is what I had prepared for you today. I actually had a lot more, and I resisted temptation to to put out about 5 more of these documents just for the sake of time. And of course, you might get tired of listening to me by the end of that. But of course, this will be available on a video next week. Whoops, that's not the right one. Let's go with this one. All right. So with that, thank you very much for listening, and I will take any of your questions or comments, particularly in terms of your level of understanding now of how important it is that we attack given problems from the human perspective and from the organizational perspective, and what we're really looking at. We're not looking and focusing on the errors, the human errors. We're going to go way past that. Those are symptoms. And like we said, accidents are normal, right? Lots of defenses are like Swiss cheese. A lot of things had to have failed. And what is the other one here? Yeah, HRO. Lots of great principles there where we can't oversimplify when we have complex issues. Okay. All right. I am open for comments or questions.
This is Kate.
Hello. I can hear you. Speak up a little bit.
Yeah. So, a question on the last one, HRO. High performers resist the oversimplification of interpretations. Can you expand a little bit more on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. And so what ends up happening is that they dig into the details and they prefer some kind of nuanced understanding um, eh, instead of the glib, simplified explanations that we get. So you have to dig in deep when you have issues at an organization that like ours. We work in highly complex operating environments, right? So how can the answers to the problems that we find at these highly complex problems be simple, right? So too often what we're getting is, and I'll give you my experience here, is that senior managers want a simple explanation, a single root cause, and those root causes are going to be shallow event root causes, not deep-seated um, root causes into the latent organizational weaknesses or even cultural root causes. They don't want that. They want the simplest explanation that you can get away with and move past the event. So over and over and over at these sites that I go work at, they're not solving problems because they're simplifying what they're seeing. They're interpreting it in a way that dumbs down or lowers the classification, and therefore less rigor is applied, and you get some kind of simple answer and simple corrective actions. And then the corrective actions is another story. We get things like, well, we're going to clarify expectations. We're going to review and make sure. We're going to reinforce this or that. And we're going to study that, or we're going to send people back to training. Way too simple of a corrective action package to actually solve these problems. So I hope that helps. I run into this all the time wherever I travel, is the propensity to simplify the classification of issues and the approach to attacking the issues in very complex multi-systemic problems with 100 moving parts. I mean, for everything you do, there's 100 requirements, right? So how can you do 3 5 whys and expect to get anywhere of a good answer, right? Yeah, that's just not right. Good question. Good question. Thank you. All right. Anyone else or anyone have any news across the campus? Are you all affected by the shutdown in any way? The government shutdown? I'm curious about that. Hey, Robbie.
So we haven't seen or heard anything on our side. So
All right. Oh, I heard some paychecks are
yeah,
going
not
out,
yet.
right? Some paychecks are going out, but by tomorrow, some of them are going to be held back. How about you, Brad?
We're fine. Our site, we have carryover, so we plan ahead for this.
Ah, okay.
Continuing resolution is typical, and running up to government shutdown, we we plan ahead.
Well, that's good. Yeah, I hope a lot of sites do that. Very good. Well, if there's not a lot of other questions, I'm going to thank everyone for coming and officially close out the forum. And again, reach out to me for any follow-up questions. If you want to have a sidebar, love to talk to you. This video will be available here in the next few days on our website. So with that, thank you very much.